What's your scariest real-life story? Story 1, I was 17 and had just gotten my license. Back in high school, my friends and I had made it a mission to find abandoned houses to throw parties in. We had a few good candidates, but the mother lode was this house I would pass on my way home from work. It was an undeveloped shell of a huge home with a large property in the back. I had told one of my friends about it, and one day before we went to see a movie, I took him to the house. It was about dusk in summer, so I had my headlights on. I pulled into the front of the house and we were there for like 10 seconds tops before we pulled back to go to the main road. A minute later, this big truck pulls up behind us with its high beams on and riding our tail. My friend and I took note of it, but paid it no mind as we headed back to the main road. At the light, I turned right, but the truck cut through the gas station at the corner and blocked us off. Out of the truck comes this big hulk of a man, and my friend and I are completely terrified. He taps on the window and I roll it down. Now, the really unsettling part is that this is a busy road, and now there was no one in sight. He asked us what we were doing at the house, and I quickly lied and said we were making a U-turn. He stares at us for a few seconds, smiles, and sends us on our way. To this day, the house remains unfinished, and I am convinced it is an illegal operation of some sort. Story 2, woke up. Clock says 3:34 in the morning. I am 17 and in my bedroom. It is pitch black, but I hear some rattling downstairs. Terrified, I quietly tiptoe to my parents' room. Weird, it is empty. Where are my parents at 3:34 in the morning? Go upstairs to my brother's room. He is usually awake all night, but while the light is on, no one is in the room. So I guess whatever those noises are downstairs, it must be them. Why are they awake? Maybe someone passed away. I go downstairs. In the middle of my living room is what looks like two men taking our television. No one else is in sight. I run upstairs as quietly as possible, shut and lock my door. Suddenly there is banging on the door. I wake up. It was a dream, and the relief washes over me. I look over at the clock. Weird coincidence, it is 3:34 in the morning. I am shaking, but decide to go downstairs to prove to myself that everything is fine. I go downstairs. The two men are in my kitchen, yelling at my parents and brother. I run upstairs to my bedroom and lock the door. 10 seconds later, I hear banging. I woke up. It is 3:34 in the morning. This time, I had actually woken up, and I do not manage to fall back asleep for about 36 hours. Edit. Lots of responses about lucid dreaming here. I spent most of my teens and early 20s as a lucid dreamer, discovering the techniques after a childhood plagued by very frightening sleep paralysis. I found a message board back in 1998 where I learned to at least have fun with it. The above story was not a sleep paralysis experience, but it was typical of the kinds of nightmares I used to have. Strangely enough, I rarely have nested dreams anymore, and have not had a successful attempt at lucid dreaming in a few years. My guess is that it has something to do with hormones. Story 3. I lived in a bizarre little house as a child. It was incredibly tall and thin, like an attached house except freestanding, with 3 floors, a basement, and an attic. It was full of quirks, such as 2 fully functional fireplaces, a shower stall in the center of the basement, a backyard so small that you could not take 5 paces without hitting the fence, and an old-timey rope-pulled dumbwaiter that led from the kitchen to my bedroom. I loved that weird little place, but unfortunately it was incredibly old, and half of its charm was the fact that it seemed to have been designed by an inarticulate conclave of eccentrics, and eventually the repair costs exceeded what my parents were willing to put into it, and we had to move. Preparing for the move was a chore. I packed most of my stuff myself, and I had taken to throwing stuff down the dumbwaiter and shoving all my clothes so thickly in my closet that they became a single solid brick of fabric. While clearing that closet out, in fact, I came across a feature I had not noticed before: an attic entrance in the roof. Being an adventurous kid, I opened it up, stood on the closed brick, and began my first and last exploration into the topmost part of our weird little house. The first thing I noticed was that it was not as dark as it should have been. The place was strung with old red holiday lights which still burned with leftover brightness, and a dozen little cracks and holes peeped down into all the bedrooms below. The second thing I noticed was that the place was set up for habitation. The insulation was covered. There was an old gurney piled with sleeping bags and sheets, and a rusted mint green refrigerator, which still worked when I tested it. The third thing was the bones. There were a lot of bones. I was a kid at the time, with a limited understanding of anatomy, but there were bones of all types heaped into a series of piles around the center of the attic. Small and large, clean and white, from every and any imaginable sort of creature, haphazardly stacked in a half-dozen clumps. Two of them were darkened, as if someone had tried to burn them, and the walls nearest those darkened piles were scrawled in dark bone char messages. Mostly they were just smears, but the word sorry appeared more than once. That room had been sitting over my head for 8 years while I slept. Story 4. I have a fear of spiders because of a hunting trip I took with my dad and family when I was a kid. I do not enjoy shooting things. Not an animal rights activist, but I think taking life for game or bragging rights and not for food is wasteful and harsh. I had brought my handheld game, and they stationed me at one of the ground blinds so I could use the radio to tell the others if I saw any deer headed their way. I got bored as anything and got tired of grinding in my game, so I turned it off and started rifling through my backpack to find another. As I did this, I heard a strange whooshing sound that sounded very close, but I could not find anything. I walked around outside the blind, and as I came around the backside, I saw that the entire outer wall was covered in a mass of interlinked daddy-long-leg spiders. I considered running like anything, but I had no idea where the camp was, as I had been driven out to the blind. My solution was to use my can of repellent and the lighter from my backpack to blow torch all the spiders off, because foolish, that is why. The plan backfired because I made the mistake of standing downwind of the spiders. The second the fire hit them, they all let go and flew at me. The entire wall of them. Flaming, flying spiders. I immediately started yelling and rolling around on the ground. I took off all of my clothes and immediately phoned my dad on the radio and told him to come get me, and that we were going home. I have never sworn or cried so profusely in my life. I eventually went through therapy regarding this event, and now I just hate spiders in general and prefer not to be around them. Story 5. A week after gaining my cardiopulmonary resuscitation certification, I had to try and perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation on a woman dying of a hero, probably other substances to overdose. I was at a thrift store with some friends looking for Halloween costumes, and someone came in saying that someone was passed out in the parking lot. I was in the dressing room, and it just got super quiet, so I came out and told them I was certified, and I would go take a look and that they needed to call 911. I go outside and do not see anyone on the ground. Someone comes out and shouts that the person is in the car that is parked far out by itself. I ran over and honestly freaked out. She was pretty much already gone, completely blue in the face, slumped against her car window. She had the red substance user rings around her eyes, but those were blue too because she was so oxygen deprived. We opened the door, and I will never forget that when we turned her head to see if she still had a pulse, she had tears running down her face. We pulled her out of the car, put her on the ground, and took her pulse again because the first person to do it was not sure. We started cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and the ambulance arrived about a minute after. They got her strapped up and in and continued cardiopulmonary resuscitation. They had another ambulance come, and those emergency medical technicians got out, and there were literally like 6 of them surrounding her. The officer told us they had administered some type of substance that can apparently reverse hero overdoses if given in time, but she was pretty much gone already. They would do the necessary stuff until they could get to the hospital and call it, according to him. I also remember when we opened the door, there were hero needles and empty pill bottles all over the floor. She was not very old. We also think she had kids. She had some toys and a car seat, plus 2 names tattooed on her. Story 6. I am 23 now, and this happened about 10 years ago, so I was probably 13 or 14. Anyway, I used to skateboard all the time with my friends Tim and Brandon. One day we got done skating, and we decided to go to 7-Eleven to get some food drinks before we went home. Remember, I was only 13, 14, so we were not driving. We had skated to the 7-Eleven and were planning on skating walking back home. Anyway, we buy our drinks and we left the store. We walked to the parking lot's exit and prepared to cross the highway. It is not a busy highway, since it is a small town. While we waited for the traffic light to turn red, so that we could cross. I looked behind me at the 7-Eleven gas pumps. I noticed a 40 to 50-year-old man pumping gas into his white truck. He stared at me, and before I knew it, he dropped the gas pump and jumped into his truck. He slammed on the gas and sped straight at my friends and I. He missed us, but he grazed my arm and knocked my skateboard out of my hand. My friend Brandon screamed, "What the heck, you awful person," as the man peeled out and sped into the parking lot next to 7-Eleven. I swear to God, he drove through a ditch which was between 7-Eleven's parking lot and the parking lot he was in and tried to run us over again. This is where it got bad. The three of us started running at full speed across the highway and toward the local library, which is like 2 to 3 blocks from 7-Eleven. When we were about 1/2 a block away, I looked back and saw the man speeding toward us, full of rage. Brandon and Tim ran up to the library doors and I ran toward the woods. It was Sunday, so I knew the library was closed, and there was a trail in the woods which led to my backyard. Meanwhile, this man peeled into the parking lot and hopped out of his truck. I looked behind me before escaping into the woods and saw him grab either a shotgun or a crowbar. I was pretty far away at this point, and I was freaking out, so my vision was not great from the bed of his truck. I ran all the way home. When I got to my street, my neighbor Tim's dad told me to get in his car because we had to go to the video store, which is where Tim's mom worked. When I got there, I found Tim and Brandon. They ran to the video store after realizing that the library was closed and 3 officers. A minute later, my mom came in, crying her eyes out because Brandon and Tim told her they did not know if I lived or not. Everyone had thought that I was captured. Tim told me that he saw the guy running after me into the woods, which is scary because I thought the man was chasing them, not me. Anyway, he was never caught, and I spent the next 5 years worrying about every white truck I saw. Story 7. When I was in high school, I had a really good friend who lived next door to a house that was always up for sale. People would move out in the middle of the night without a word, and it had not had the same owner for more than 6 months straight for a couple of years. One night we were really bored, and he suggested we go explore the house next door, since it had sat empty for a while. We go around back, and there is a dog door that he can crawl through, and he unlocks the door and lets me in. The house itself is really unremarkable. It looked like it was built in maybe the 1950s and was a craftsman-style house in an older, nicer part of town. My friend's house was similarly built. The kitchen had a really nice built-in breakfast table set against a picture window. The house's electricity was off, but you could see the streetlight through the window. My friend and I sit down on the floor, across from this table, and are just hanging out talking. Why? Who knows? All of a sudden, my friend screams, and in that instant, my vision goes black. But it was not that I just could not see. My body was engulfed in this sickly coldness from head to toe. I start screaming, and I feel my friend's hand grabbing mine and pulling me in some direction forcefully. My vision slowly comes back, and I start to warm up when I realize that we are outside under the streetlight. It was December and should have been much warmer inside of that house. Finally, I look at my friend, and he looks scared. I am really confused and kind of panicked myself, and finally ask him what happened. He says that as I was talking, a black thing, this figure that was all black and only had the vague shape of a girl, crawled out from under the table and sat on top of me. Apparently, I started groping around with my eyes wide open, like I could not see, and he was so freaked out he pulled me out of the house. We are still friends and we bring it up every now and then, but the story itself never changes and it still sends chills down my spine. To this day, I have never felt such blackness or coldness in my life. It was palpable, almost sticky. For a couple of days afterward, I could not shake this unsettling feeling, and I could never walk past that house again. I am scared to get out of bed now. Story 8. Every time I stay at my grandma's house, I hear someone walking upstairs. It starts at one side of the room, casually walks to the other and stops. This will happen maybe twice a night. I did not start hearing it until I was about 14, when my grandparents made me start sleeping in a different room on the first floor because they started sleeping in separate bedrooms. Blah, blah, blah. Regardless, both of their rooms are also on the first floor. For a little backstory, I have always been afraid of the upstairs at their house. I do not know why, but it has always freaked me out, and I refuse to ever go up there alone. I am 23 now, still will not go up alone. There is one room specifically, though. It is a long, narrow bedroom. When you open the door, there are closets on your left and right, a bed placed roughly in the middle of the room, and a window on the far side opposite the door. I was told growing up by my grandparents that the sons of the previous owner claimed to see a gorilla come out of the closet at night, dance around the room, and go back into the closet. I thought nothing of this story until I had to start sleeping in the other room, the room located directly below the scary room upstairs. So we all go to bed. All the lights in the house are off, and I am still awake, lying on the bed. Then I heard it. Thump, 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 starting at one end of the room upstairs. It got closer to me, passed right above me, and continued to the end of the room, where it stopped. I am wide awake, terrified out of my mind. It was no question to me that I had heard footsteps. I knew that slow, casual pace. I was freaked out and went to my grandpa's room. I told him what I heard. He told me that the house is old and it creaks, but he turned the dining room light on for me, so I felt a little safer. I tried going back to sleep. Then it started again, this time from where it ended the first time, by the window upstairs. It walks over me again and stops when it reached the door. I thought it was over until 5 seconds later when I heard it coming down the stairs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, silence as it reached the landing, then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and silence again as it reached the first floor. I was frozen in shock. Whatever it was on my floor of the house, and sadly unaffected by the dining room light. I was staring at the doorway to my room. The dining room light was shining in, and my vision began to distort. I felt dizzy with fear, so I pulled the blankets over my head and suddenly heard a scratching sound from inside my room. I knew exactly where it was coming from too, my grandpa's gun case. It was a very obvious sound, scratching on the wood. Long scratches down the front of the gun case door. I could even hear the door ever so slightly tapping against the frame as each scratch began. I tried to scream and I could not. I took a second to take a deep breath and let out a loud scream. In seconds, my grandpa had made it to my room, and I was relieved. Needless to say, he still did not believe me. So I did what any normal person would do. I draped a sheet over the side of the bed and slept underneath it. I wrapped myself tight in a comforter, put on headphones, and turned my back to the door. There could be a party of ghosts in my room, and I would not even know. The next morning, my grandpa told my grandma about what happened the night before. She said, "Oh, that is silly. You know, your cousin woke me up the last time she stayed here. She came in my room saying, 'I hear footsteps.' I slept under the bed for the rest of my week, stay with them. I have stayed there countless times since that happened, and I hear the footsteps every time. I sleep on top of the bed now, but keep my back to the door and sleep with headphones on. I have not heard it come down the stairs since that first night, but if it does, I do not want to know." Story 9. About 2 years ago, I was driving home from a family reunion pretty late at night, and the drive was about 2 hours. I did not stay the night because I had to be back for work the following day. Most of the drive was on roads with dense bushes and trees on either side, the real creepy ones you see a lot in movies. Anyway, I had been driving about 45 minutes, and I was starting to get really tired. You know how sometimes you just suddenly become really tired, out of nowhere? Well, yeah, that happened to me. I knew I was not going to last, but I did not come across any place that I felt I could park and safely sleep. Anyway, after it became clear to me that I was not going to find a place to pull up, and my tiredness was not going away, I did something very questionable. I pulled over to the side of the road onto the grass, behind some bushes, to try and hide my car from anybody else who was going to come past. The roads were not empty. I came across another car every few minutes or so. I made a mental note that the time was 11:22 and then fell asleep. Sometime later, I was awoken by a scratching sound. I looked at the clock, 11:50. The sound stopped after a few seconds, and because I was still extremely tired, I did not bother looking around and simply went back to sleep. I was later awoken by the same sound, and it was now 12:40. This time it really freaked me out because the sound did not stop. The thought ran across my mind that it was just an animal inspecting the car, but why would it return almost an hour after it had left the previous time? I looked in my rear view mirror and just managed to catch a glimpse of something running away into the forest. Now, at the time, I thought it was the hook killer. You know, the one that scratched that couple's car and then harmed the guy when he got out to investigate? Forget that, I thought to myself. So I got out of there. There was a bend no more than 100 yards up the road, and as I came around it, there was a car parked off to the side of the road with the driver's side door opened. I slowed down just to look to see if anyone was in there. There was not. Then I looked in my rear view mirror. I did not see anything, and all of a sudden this guy comes sprinting around the corner. He starts screaming at me, shouting stuff like, "Hey, you, get out of your car now." I noped out of there and sped off. I never saw the guy again. Morale of the story? Do not sleep on the side of a deserted road. Story 10. I was 16 and woke up in the middle of the night to seeing my clothes being rustled about in my doorway. After washing my clothes, I like to hang dry them on my doorframe. I notice some really gray, veiny-looking legs, and then I see these really long pointed sticks moving through my clothes. It took me a second, but my sleepy eyes adjusted to see one of the most grotesque, demon-looking figures I have ever seen. He was extremely skinny and had a distended stomach. His skin was gray and veiny, and those long sticks were his fingers. His chin was long, his eyes had no lids on them, and were unusually big. His tiny mouth was in a pucker and moved like he was eating an imaginary lollipop. His hunchback looked as though it tore out of the strange hospital gown he was wearing. He just stared at me, and I tried to scream my grandmother awake, who was sharing a room with me for the weekend. He would not stop staring, and I stared back and tried to shake my grandmother awake. I started noticing other things about him, like how large and cone-like his head was, and how hairless and shriveled he looked as he stood still, surprised I could see him. My grandmother woke up, looked towards the door, and he was gone. In the weeks leading to this encounter, I had been experiencing strange things in my house, like my bedroom door slamming and locking on its own. One night I woke up to what felt like several hands touching my feet and legs in horrible nightmares. After the experience with this strange gray man, I told my parents, and they had my room cleared spiritually. I do not know if that really made those horrible things stop or gave me peace of mind from things I was manifesting myself. All I know is I do not experience those things anymore, and I will never sleep with a door open again. Story 11. When I was about 7, my 2 brothers and I were playing in an area that was used as an unofficial motocross place. We decided to dig a tunnel for some reason, being the extra smart guys we were. It took a few hours to dig about 6 feet in and 2 feet high. I was right up at the face when suddenly the tunnel collapsed. It was all dirt with no supports. My world went instantly black and hot. By hot, I mean furnace hot. I could not move a muscle from the weight of the soil completely enclosing me. I started to really panic, as you do. Everything started turning red, which I guess was blood being forced into my head. Every breath was getting harder as the soil constrained me more and more. Even though my hands were near my face, I could not move my arms to clear the dirt around my head, and also started breathing in dirt, which made me cough, which made me contract my stomach, and then I could not draw a breath at all. This is not what made me panic, though. The total darkness turning red with the incredible heat made my young mind think I was going to an awful place. I do not know how long I was buried for, but it seemed like an eternity. Suddenly, I felt something grab one of my feet. My brothers had been frantically digging through the collapse to pull me out and managed to reach me and then pull me out. We never told my parents. I just went home and got hosed down. Story 12. My house sits farther back in the lot than most other houses. It is a strange layout as well. The sidewalk runs the length of the living room and ends at the front porch, which lets into the living room. Large windows that do not open allow great light to get into the living room, but at the cost of no privacy. The rest of my family was on vacation, and having the house to myself, I decided I would get smashed. Well, I pass out on the couch in the living room at about 9, when I realized I was too scared to walk back to my room. The couch is right underneath these big windows. I woke up suddenly, not knowing why. I had a severe case of the chills, and I could not figure out why. Then the banging started. It came from right above me. I did not move, but I opened my eyes and looked up at the window. Someone was standing there, pounding on the glass. Without moving, I looked at the cable box. It was around 3 in the morning. The banging continues. Then it stops suddenly, but I still did not move. Suddenly it commences again, coming from two different directions now. Someone is banging on the window, and another person is banging on the front door. They kept doing it, would not go away. Finally, after about 40 minutes, they quit. It was the most terrifying event I can recall at the moment. It made me a nervous wreck after that. I called a friend the next day to see if he would come over and stay for the rest of the week, and his response was, "What the heck for? So that we can both be harmed in our sleep? Thanks a lot, jerk." Story 13. When I was in elementary school, my family decided to add on to our house. So we hired an architect and contractor. We live in an old colonial home that was built to be historically correct. For example, 200-year-old softwood floors, proper paint colors, etc. Because of this, my parents chose to have all of the wood trim painted in the addition. The contractor did not want to because we actually bought quality wood, and he thought it was a waste of time. So we ended up hiring another contractor after about a year of arguing and having almost no work done on the house, even though the contractor and his team were consistently being paid. The new contractor was one that my parents' lawyer had met through church. Most of his team also went to that same church. Now, we always tried to be hospitable towards the workmen and would offer them drinks and snacks, particularly in the summer. We live in a hot, humid climate that is pretty much unbearable. So my mom would send me outside with lemonade and the like for the workers. They were all really nice, and I remember having nice conversations with them about whatever now 9-year-old me found interesting. I particularly remember this one guy named Kenny. The actual contractor never showed up on the job, and Kenny was put in charge. Kind of like a gopher, he was always really nice to me. Anyways, a few months after they have finally finished the addition on our house, I think it took about 2.5 years, Kenny's name is published in the newspaper. He was put in prison for charges of harmful acts toward children. Before he worked at our house, he had been on a list of offenders. The contractor found this detail about his employee unnecessary to share with my parents. I was an elementary age girl at the time. My brother was in middle school. My parents would leave us home alone with the workmen there on occasion. Thinking about this still gives me the creeps. I cannot. Story 14. Posted this elsewhere, but here it goes, not me, but my sister. So growing up, my sister had an imaginary friend. She said she was an older lady and she was nice, and her name was E.E. She talked to her and played with her all that jazz until she was probably 4 or so, and then it stopped. Fast forward to when my sister was about 10. My mom is not home. She got a call to go to the nursing home for Grandpa, so she bolts with Pops. My sister and I shared a room at the time, and she was in there doing whatever, and I was on the other end of the house. All of a sudden, I hear the radio in our room click on, turn all the way up, turn all the way down, and go off. This happened like 3 times, so I go in there to be all like, "What the heck, kid, knock it off," and she is sitting in our room, just white as a ghost. I go over to the radio to unplug it, no plug, no batteries, only radio in the house. I look at her and she goes, "It was E.E. I saw her. It was E.E. So I call Mom, freaking out, and Mom is so upset. Apparently Grandpa had just passed away. Okay, weird. I drop incident, whatever. A few days later at the funeral, a relative comes up to us and gives us a pic she found. My sister goes, "Hey, it is E.E. It was a picture of my grandparents when they got married. My grandmother died before I was even thought of, when my mom was 11. We live in the home my mom grew up in. We have no pictures of her at all, as my step-grandmother got rid of them all when she moved into the house a few years after mom's death." Story 15. My grandfather's company does timber. Mining was setting up an office in a relatively remote part of a third-world county and found a house that was dirt cheap, even for third-world country standards. Obviously, there was a catch. The villagers in that area told him not to purchase it since the house was haunted and everyone who had ever lived there died violently. He decided it was just some superstitious nonsense and got it anyway. So the guy setting up the office will live on the top floor of the house with this family and the lower floors for the office. He moved in with his wife and 3 kids. Anyway, my grandfather suddenly got no news from him for the longest time. Since this was in a remote part of a third world country, he was not too worried since he just assumed they lost power or something. He finally contacted the local police to go check on the guy since he was completely unreachable. They found everyone gone. Apparently the guy harmed his wife, kids, and then himself with a machete. Yes, not a gun. A machete. He actually harmed himself to death. It was not one of those cuts on the wrist to let someone slowly pass away. Everyone was struck down, including the guy himself. The description of the scene had to be an exaggeration since I am assuming the sight of 5 bodies, including 3 kids, were scary enough to make people see things. So I will not bother putting it here since I am not sure what is true, and there were details that people could not have witnessed. Let us just say I stopped paying attention after I heard the phrase magic machete. I was told the entire room was covered in blood, including the ceiling. Some people were saying the blood on the ceiling had to have gotten there. Because the spirits threw the bodies around, I had to explain about blood pressure and got tons of weird looks. Now the weird part, if this is not weird enough, was that he managed to barricade the door with the bed, with his wife and kids on it, and it is one of those gigantic old beds that is extremely hard to move. The locals say this is evidence he was possessed by spirits. I say moving to the middle of nowhere in some third world country drove the guy nuts, and uncomfortable people can do all sorts of strange things and even perform surprising feats of strength. Anyway, my grandfather had to pay a few bribes to make sure nothing gets to the press, not hard middle of nowhere, about the entire thing, and get the police to classify the deaths as natural. No idea how they will explain that. Third world countries are awesome. All employees in the know had to sign an NDA too. He then tried getting other volunteers to set up the office. Even if they have not heard all the gory details because of my grandfather's gag order, everyone knew the previous guy died. No one volunteered. He promoted one guy, gave him a fancy title, and told him he is in charge of setting up that office. The guy quit. Story 16. When I was about 13 or 14, I lived on a farm in North Carolina. This was not a regular farm that you would expect with fields full of beans and stuff. It was actually a pine tree harvestery. Pine needles are a big landscaping commodity, and so we lived basically in the woods and would bale the pine straw every year. Whatever, the point is that my house was in the middle of 550 acres of perfectly lined longleaf pines. My living room had a huge picture window. I will not go into the architecture of the house, but it was a weird custom job built by some dentist in the 30s. The window in the living room stretched nearly the entire length of the room, maybe 50 feet. The house was built on a subtle hill, so the living room itself sat 5 or 6 feet off the ground, so you had something of an angle to look out at a solid mile of pine trees. During the winter, it was unsettling because you would get just a bit of snow, enough to reflect moonlight so that you could see the dogs running around at night. I will be honest, I hated that room and that window. So now to the relevant part. I had a cousin over for the weekend, and we were doing what kids do in the country, throwing stuff in the fireplace to see what happens. It is getting late and the fire's dying down, so we build the big kingdom of couch cushions and blankets in the living room and get ready for bed. Nothing out of the ordinary until we hear the dogs barking. They were really far away. The property stretches for nearly a mile, so I just assumed they were chasing off whatever animal felt like wandering into my yard. So my cousin is staring out the window and not saying anything, which prompts the standard, "What is up?" He just kind of keeps staring and says he feels like he is seeing things. Naturally, I get all anxious and start staring out the window as well. Nothing happens for a few minutes, and he gets more and more annoyed with me because I am asking what he saw. He keeps shushing me so that he can focus. And then we both see it. A shadow of a person moves from one tree to the next. Not a run, not a leap, just a brisk walk from one tree to another. This is probably 100 yards out from the house. We cannot actually tell if the person is coming closer or not because we are dealing with moonlight reflecting off of snow slush ice. I guess the crazy part is that we did not so much freak out because at this point there is still that chance that we did not see what we saw, you know? So we just kept staring. We should have gone to wake up my dad, but he is an idiot and the kind of guy to walk out on the patio and holler into the woods with his rifle. We were just scared enough to agree that we do not want to taunt whatever is happening. So about 3 minutes later, it happens again, but a good 50 feet from where we first saw it. Another person, another tree, a few strides, and they were gone. This happened every few minutes for the next half hour, and we just stared. At this point, I should mention that I did not really have neighbors. The land surrounding our farm was federal paper. I do not know who owns it now, so it was miles and miles of uncultivated trees. You do not see people around the farm unless they intend to be there. So we keep watching as these two figures intermittently appear and vanish, until finally we see one appear, but not disappear. Instead, we focus in on it and see that it is now running forward. We lose it and go wake my dad. By the time we get into the room with my half-awake father, there is no one to be seen. We sprint around locking doors and windows. Keep in mind that we are out in the country with no one around. It rarely occurs to lock doors. Every door was worse than the last because you just know that as soon as you reach the door, someone is going to be trying to open it. Although that never happened. We locked everything up, walked around the house at least 50 times, making sure no one got in without us knowing, and then convinced my dad to fall asleep in the living room with us while we stared out the window. I never understood why my dad would not call the police. He always had this, we take care of our own mentality, and it simply was not an option to call 911. The next day we went out to look, and absolutely, there were footprints everywhere in the snow. We saw them between trees, and then we finally saw where someone had been standing right in front of the window. But as I said, I would not have seen them because while I am 7 feet up in the living room, they would have been right beneath me. Story 17. One night when I was 13 years old, I had gotten my period for the first time and ended up sleeping on my back. I am an avid side sleeper, so this is a really weird position for me. I was dreaming, and in that dream, I was sitting in a chair. I leaned it back on its back legs, and suddenly the chair started to slowly lean further and further back until I drifted into the eternity below me. This freaked me out, and I jolted awake. When I awoke, there was a figure hovering directly above my face, and all I saw was a hooded white, flat ovular, and relatively featureless face with big ovular glassy eyes, and an expression like it was determined to devour my eternal soul. The face was humanoid, very two-dimensional with thin, quivering, angry lips, and 2 holes where its nose would be, with eyebrows arched high up onto its forehead. I could feel an unworldly hate burning right through me as it loomed over me. It was absolutely the most helpless I have ever felt and would ever feel, because it was more than just my life I felt was at stake. I tried to move, scream, breathe, anything, and could not. It was paralyzing me with its hate. I finally was able to let out the tiniest whimper, and as soon as the sound escaped me, it stood straight up and paced back and forth at the foot of my bed, still staring. It was like a force field was erected around me, and the frustration of it trying to get at me again was radiating throughout the room. It looked like a starving tiger behind glass, longing to lunge at its vulnerable prey. If only it were not for the barrier between us. It was tall, almost all the way to the ceiling tall, and very thin. Wearing a long black cloak that covered everything except that terrifying face. I realized that it had not been floating over me. It had stood at the foot of my bed and leaned over it to hover its face over mine. I sat up in my bed, still frozen, just staring at it. My closet door behind it was cracked a few inches, and it swooped in there and peered out at me, never having broken eye contact. It continued to stare, quivering with hate and frustration, until it slowly faded away. I turned my light on, and it stayed on at night for a long time. I never slept with that closet door open again, and I did not sleep again that night. I stayed the night in the living room with all of the lights on, just sitting on the couch. I later dismissed it as sleep paralysis for several years. It was a very believable and plausible explanation. Then I became friends with a girl who confided in me and told me a story. She was up late at night by herself with her door open. Something out in the living room by the kitchen caught her eye, and when she looked at it, she saw a figure standing there, beckoning her to approach it. She looked away, refocused on it, and it was still there. When she described it, she described the exact same creature that had attacked me. We each got a sketchbook and drew what we saw, and when she showed me hers, I was staring at my attacker all over again. She had never heard my story before telling hers. Story 18. A few years ago, there was a small plane accident that occurred in a neighboring town. I was part of the county volunteer search and rescue group, and when we got the call, I was one of the responders to help try and see if there was any chance of a survivor from the crash. We found out from the sheriff that was there that it was an elderly couple and their young granddaughter that were in this plane. Immediately, it went dead silent. You could see the life drain from the other responders' faces as soon as it was said. Upon getting to the area that the crash happened at, it was clear that there would be no survivors from this accident. It would not have a happy ending. There would be no joyful and tear-filled reunion. This plane was absolutely destroyed. Our lead turned to the group and said if anybody was uncomfortable or not willing to do the recovery of the bodies, there would be no hard feelings or anything held against them. Some people just are not cut out for this. About half of the group said they could not do it. They helped set up the rappelling lines, made some radio calls to other teams that were lower on the hillside, helping us navigate through the broken trees and aircraft parts to get to where we expected to find the bodies. I will never forget the feeling of complete, utter numbness I experienced that day. The first thing any of us saw was this small, stuffed teddy bear and the blood that had soaked onto it. When we finally were able to get down to the bodies, we had to stop and collect ourselves. It was heartbreaking to see this little girl with such empty, devoid eyes. She was gone, never to grow up and experience life like most of us had, never to know the joys, aches, frustrations, sadness, excitement, and everything else life throws at you. I have seen a lot in my few years as an emergency medical technician. I have seen substance overdoses, diabetic shock, car crashes, suicides of all manners. But this messed me up for a while. Nobody should have to go through what we went through to help bring closure for the family. Nobody should have to deal with bringing back a child in a body bag. But if I do not stand up and do it, someone else has to bear the heartache, the depression, the numbness, and I do not ever want someone else to experience it like I did. Story 19. Back in 2004, I was a young, dumb 17-year-old country girl in the city for the first time for college. One night I decided I could totally safely walk back to my dorm at around 1:30 in the morning, despite not really knowing where I was. Of course, I instantly end up wandering around a terrible part of the city. Most of the streetlights are busted out, trash everywhere. Loud arguments from inside the dilapidated as anything row houses. In short, I would not even want to be here in the middle of the day. A car drives up behind me and slows down, so they are keeping pace with me for nearly an entire block. I look over, and there are 5 unsavory-looking men inside. By this point, I was approaching an intersection, and they pull up, make a left, and stop in the street directly in my path. Mother, forget it. I completely panic at this point and just stand there right in front of them. My mind went completely blank. I have never been that scared in my life. It did not even make sense to try to run because they would have caught me without question. I am not really sure how long I stood there, but suddenly the porch light in the house just past the car came on. Dude casually strolls outside carrying a bag of trash, and car peels away. I completely break down crying and shaking. Dude spots me and listens to my probably incoherent story, takes me inside and gives me a soda. Then he and his roommate walk me back to my dorm. They were both lovely and invited me to check out their stand-up sometime, but unfortunately I was too young to get into a bar. I never saw them again, do not even remember their names, but feel pretty confident that if that guy had not decided to take his trash out at 1 in the morning on a Saturday, my life would have taken a really unpleasant turn that night. Story 20. So my uncle used to work a lot when I was younger. He has done a lot of different things to make money, but one consistent thing is that in the summer months and into late fall, he paints houses. It is a legitimate business and everything. He has got a truck with a number and a name and supplies in the back. The works. Every now and then he would call my dad when he needed a little extra help, and I would work for him. No big deal, really. It is just painting houses. What could possibly go wrong? Well, it takes a while to paint a whole house. If the weather conditions are not right, then you cannot paint. One particular fall was extremely wet. It rained what felt like every single day. My uncle would paint multiple houses at a time, so sometimes he would get caught up due to situations like these, and I would work a little more than usual. That was fine by me, though. The job was not hard and it paid well. Anyway, it was a warm day for late fall, but there was still a distinct chill in the air, one that kind of penetrated through you and stung your soul. My uncle had this job he had to finish, It was an old Victorian house in a quiet part of town. A lady and her husband, who was an author, lived there. Due to the weather, it had taken longer than expected to paint the house, and there were family issues going on at the time, which further complicated things. So my uncle gets a call one day from the lady who lives at the house. She says that her husband is trying to write his next book, but he keeps getting distracted by the scaffolding outside the house. So she wanted to know if we could come over and finish the job as soon as possible. My uncle was always an honest businessman. They had contracted him to do the job in midsummer, but he had lots of jobs that summer, and the wet conditions I mentioned above made it difficult to finish anything. However, these people were insistent but really polite, and not wanting to lose customers or get a bad recommendation, my uncle decided to put the house as a high priority. After all, it would only take a day or two to finish. So we show up to this house mid-afternoon. Like I said, it was a weird kind of chilly that day, and I also remember a really eerie calm. The day was slightly overcast, so everything was shrouded in gray. It was like the perfect setting for a mystery crime novel. So we arrive at this house, and my uncle and I move to the back. The front of the house was already done, so there was nothing left there. My uncle, being the more experienced painter, would always do the touch-ups, and I would simply apply the first coats, since they took little skill. Anyway, we get to the back of the house, and he asks me if I am scared of heights. I was 17 at the time, and although they do creep me out a little, I did not want to seem like a child in front of my uncle, so I told him I was not. He was happy to hear that. He has me climb up the scaffold to the third floor to finish an upper section of the house. There was a window up there, a small little oval one that looked into the attic. The attic also happened to be the husband's study. He would do most of his writing in there. So I am climbing up this scaffolding, cans of paint dangling behind me, and various paintbrushes and other tools in the utility belt my uncle let me borrow. I get to the top of the scaffolding and set all my supplies down. I crack open a can of paint and start painting like I had a few hundred times before. Outside of the temperature, the overcast and the eerie calm this day was like any other. I am working my way across the top part of the house when I get to the window that looks into the study. I bend down, dip my paintbrush, and stand back up to paint above the window. The window was in my direct line of sight, and I could not help gazing in. I see a man, the husband, staring back at me with a face completely barren of any emotion. I had never seen a face so devoid of feeling before. I still have not. Of course, I get startled and take a step back. I chuckle and smile at the guy, but he does not smile back. Instead, while remaining completely emotionless, he draws a pistol up to his head that he was holding in his hand the whole time and proceeds to harm himself without ever breaking eye contact right in front of me while I am staring at him. In utter shock, I gasp and let out the smallest scream as I step back in fear. Only I stepped back a step too much and fell off the scaffolding. Alerted by the noise, my uncle looked up in just enough time to see me fall off the scaffolding from the third story. I was lucky enough to land in a bush and only suffer a broken ankle and a few scratches. The biggest wounds happened in my head. I had to go to counseling for a while. It has been years since then, and I still remember that man's face. I have never forgotten it. It will always be burned in the back of my head. I know why. Looking back, his face was so devoid of emotion because he never felt any emotion at all. He literally did not care about what he was doing. As it turns out, the man was seriously depressed and facing marital issues with his wife. Combined with a few too many nights, drunk on whiskey and facing writer's block, I guess he decided he could not take it anymore. His wife moved out of the house shortly after, and we never finished the job. To this day, that house remains abandoned, and to this day, I try not to drive down the street it is on. I am scared that if I do and happen to pass the backyard, I will see that man staring back at me from that window, cold and emotionless. Story 21. About 4 years ago, I woke up one late morning on a day off at 10:21. You will learn why I remember this 4 years later in a second. I got out of bed, used the restroom, got dressed, etc. I went back into my room and picked up my phone to check for messages, and the clock in the phone said 10:25. I was surprised because I know that it did not take me only 4 minutes to dress. I had lingered in the warm bathroom quite a while and brushed my teeth too, etc. I looked at my bedroom alarm clock to confirm, since that was the clock I had looked at when I woke up. It also said 10:25. I shrugged it off and figured in my sleepy, just woke up state, I had misread the original 10:21. I went downstairs, turned on the personal computer, turned on the news on the television to listen to, and started cooking breakfast. I wanted to microwave up some rice leftovers from last night, so I went to pop them in the microwave. The time on the microwave was 10:25. I whipped out my phone to check the time. It still said 10:25. There was no way. There was no way that I checked the clock upstairs, walked downstairs, turned on the personal computer and the television, got a glass of water, and started cooking eggs in the matter of less than a minute. I decided to stand there and watch the microwave clock while counting to 60. I figured if it did not turn to 10:26 in 60 seconds or less, clearly it was malfunctioning. It turned to 10:26 about 20 seconds into my count, which made sense. It had been 10:25 for a while before I looked. I finished making my breakfast, plated it up, and took it over to the personal computer like the lonely slob I am. The time on the personal computer said 10:20. I pulled out my phone. My phone also said 10:20. That is when I started writing all this stuff down. I pulled up the little clock toolbar and watched the second hand go around. While I watched it, time seemed to pass normally. It ticked to 10:21 and 10:22 as I watched the second hand go around. Over the next, what felt like an hour or so, maybe hour and a half, all the clocks in my house, as well as internet ones, seemed to pass time normally while I observed them. But if I looked away for a while, at least 2 minutes or so, they would make no sense. At one point about 15 minutes after these events, the cell phone and personal computer read 10:14, then later 10:13, then back into the 10:20s. After the hour and a half, they normalized, and I have never experienced it since. Story 22, I was on holiday in Cancun, Mexico. It was 2025 and I was 15. Having been for a swim, I decided to go and get a shower and change before getting something to eat. I entered the apartment and went through to my room, grabbed my stuff, and entered the bathroom. As I shut the bathroom door behind me, I felt something fall onto my hand. When I looked, I saw a large black Mexican creature with a few too many legs for my taste. It completely covered the back of my hand, and in the brief second I looked at it, I determined it was some sort of spider or tarantula. Now, being from England, I am neither used to nor capable of dealing with such creatures, so I was forced to rely on pure human instinct. This was it, fight or flight. This was my moment to prove I had become a man. I could tame the beast and parade it in front of my family. I could prove to the world I was its master, and no creature on this planet could take me down. I let out a sudden roar and started shaking my hand violently to force this thing off while making my way on top of the toilet seat. It fell on the floor and lay still, not moving an inch. I grew in confidence and put one foot back on the floor to investigate. Suddenly it got up. This time I screamed like a pop fan who had just got a message. I retreated back to the sanctuary of the toilet seat and watched in horror as this thing scurried towards me. It had climbed to the top of the door and waited for me. The toilet seat no longer felt safe. It was going to hurt me. It was then I noticed it only had 6 legs and was not moving like any sort of spider I knew of. My fear started to fade. I recognized the shape of the animal, but could not put my finger on what it was. It had a large body and long, spindly legs. It turned out it was a crab that did not have any pincers. I have no idea how it got into the bathroom as there were no windows, and the door was shut. I captured it in a pan and released it near the lagoon. I like to think it got eaten by an alligator. Story 23. Throwaway because I have never told anyone. When I was 14, my brother moved out of my mom's house to start college, leaving me the entire top floor. I had been living in the top floor alone for about a month before I first started hearing weird sounds coming from the hallway and bathroom area outside of my bedroom. Every day at some time in the day, I would hear footsteps going away from my bedroom, or a door suddenly rock on its hinges like it does when someone shuts another door and the air pressure changes. Normally, I could only hear the footsteps from outside of the hallway, but some nights I could hear footsteps moving right past me in the hallway. It continued like that for a long time. I spent weeks where I would investigate every sound and wait in the halls late at night for the footsteps to come by. Then I would spend weeks ignoring it and blowing it off as a creaky house. In November that year, I think I saw what was making the sound. I was falling asleep with my head turned toward the shut door to the hallway. My computer desk was right next to the door. I could see a blue light next to the power button. I nodded off for a bit, but in a daze I noticed that the blue light was flickering like something was in front of it, and I focused my eyes on a silhouetted man standing between me and the hallway door, looking at my computer desk. I instantly woke up. I was staring at an intruder and trying to figure out what was happening. I concluded that I would just roll out of bed as quietly as possible and make a run for the door. He left it open when he came in. Before I go any further, I swear this is true. I know how crazy it sounds. So I attempt to execute my runaway plan, but the exact moment I shifted my waist to slide out of bed, the man turned around and looked straight at me. He did not have a face. It was hard to tell at first, but now that we were looking right at each other, I could see he was like a shadowy void from head to toe. I sat up as fast as I could, but sooner than I could make it up, he was at the edge of my bed. I rolled backward onto my bed and felt substanced, like I had suddenly been injected with anesthesia or something. I could not speak. I was trying to scream for my mom or stepdad, but every time I tried, all I got were squeaks. I was still staring right at the intruder. He reached out a hand and covered my eyes. I blinked, and he was gone. I could speak and move as normal now, and I jumped out of bed. Nobody was in the room, but the door was still open. I remember shutting the door, and I remember seeing the door shut before I fell asleep, but the door was open when I got up. I have thought about this experience a whole lot since it happened, and the door is the only thing I cannot explain away. I stay away from the dark now. Story 24. To start, I just want to say that I have never been the type of person that gets caught up in the idea of paranormal activities or ghost stories. To me, even at a young age, those types of stories just seem completely unbelievable, and I could never take them seriously. With that being said, what I am about to post is something that happened to me a few years ago that pretty much changed all of that. It is not an overly scary story, but I think the simplicity of it is what creeped me out as much as it did. My mom was in the real estate business, which often required her to check out houses on her own before taking customers with her. She would usually just do this on her own, but every once in a while she would take me. Well, this house comes on the market that many other agents apparently say is haunted, and my mom figured she would take me along. I will be honest, the house was pretty creepy, completely covered in vines. But whatever, it is an old house, not really a big deal or out of the ordinary. We go in and look around the first floor, and for the most part it seems like most houses she takes me to, still furnished, and has that smell of a house that has been empty for a while. The first thing that struck me as a little bit odd was that they had one of those old-style box televisions, and it was playing some old black and white documentary, and it just made the house seem really old and gloomy. We eventually made our way upstairs to look at the bedrooms. The second floor was set up so that there was one long hallway with 2 or 3 doors staggered down its length. The first room was normal enough, but as we got to the second room, we saw it was completely full of stuffed animals and not the toys, but a whole room dedicated to real stuffed animals. Even though I thought that was pretty strange, the room was fine besides that. Pretty neat and nothing out of place. Wanting to get out of the room, we went down the hallway to check out the final bedroom, which again was fine. We are on our way to go downstairs, and for some reason, as we passed the second room, I look back in and immediately stop in my tracks because there was now a chair directly in the center of the room. We were both positive it was not there before, since we would have literally walked into it when we were in the room before. But nonetheless, there it is, sitting directly in the middle of the room like it was meant to be there. Obviously, we got out of the house pretty quickly after seeing that. It was something so simple, but what really got me was that there was no explanation for it. We were the only 2 in the house, and neither of us went off on our own to check out a room without the other. So how does a chair randomly move in arguably the weirdest room in the entire house? I consider myself a pretty logical person, and the fact that I cannot think of a single explanation for what happened is why thinking about that house still bothers me so many years later. On a side note, in the few years after we looked at the house, it has sold 5 or 6 times, with almost all the homeowners saying that strange things would happen when they were in the house, like someone did not want them living there.